Good day, everyone. Today, we as a third year students of philosophy, we will have a roundtable discussion on how comparative philosophy will foster a meaningful dialogue between two philosophical persuasions. And so, brothers, the flow of our roundtable discussions, first we will have the presentation of each paper that you have written. And after the presentations, we will go directly to the open forum. And in this part, take note that if you have questions, if you have comments or clarifications to the paper presented by your brothers, you may bring it out in this part, you know, as part of our discussion, as part of our forum, as part of our, uh, if you have something to clarify. So this flow will be followed until the last presenter. So without further ado, let us start our discussion with the opening prayer to be led by Brother John.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Holy Spirit,
Amen.
in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Now let us begin our roundtable discussion. Let us hear the presentation of his paper. You may now proceed, Brother Jude Matthew.
Comparative philosophy fostering meaningful dialogue in philosophical persuasion. So, the term philosophy itself has been very integral part of human civilization. So it's shaping people, how they think, how they perceive these things. And here it comes the comparative philosophy, and it can help to foster dialogue between di- different philosophical traditions, either in East or West, by providing, it can be in differing these different philosophical persuasions by differing, it must be concept the common ground for discussion and misunderstanding. So, in this paper, I will analyze the definition of comparative philosophy and explain the strengths and weaknesses in fostering meaningful dialogue between these two persuasions of the same kind. So, first, in our discussion of the Cernicolo comparative philosophy is that, according to David Wong, that he defined comparative philosophy as to bring together two different philosophical traditions that developed in relative isolation and from one another are defined quite broadly along regional lines and cultural. For example, in Chinese and Eastern. So also in the book of Paul Masson Orsal, so for him, comparative philosophy is about, di ba, erecting, detecting, smudging, or tearing down of borders philosophical traditions coming from different parts of the world. So that is the introduction that is given by Sir Nicolo to us, no? The book of Paul Masson Orsal. So in this comparative philosophy, it brings criticism as well. such as the ideological view that is conducting comparison. Why there is a need of comparing that they're obviously different, di ba? Magkaiba-iba. Parang nakita si Ton, pero magkaiba-iba na siya. Ito nag-critic. Siya ito nag-critic si Ton. And then, this is one of the issue of comparative philosophy that is really, that is it really possible to compare two different philosophical tradition? Di ba? Siya ito ng pinakaano ng pakiana. And then, I would like to present to you my strand, the strand of in fostering meaningful dialogue. So, in in comparing the two philosophical traditions, this can help to create a shared language and understanding. Even though they are different, different by traditions, cultures, orientation, but there can be a shared language and understanding between these two philosophical traditions. Maybe one previously seemed incompatible, but soon along the way as we compare these two philosophical traditions, it can foster a meaningful dialogue. It can have a shared language and understanding. Thus, comparative philosophy is it can be an apparatus, instrument, or avenue to in bridging the gap, di ba, the gap um, of the comparative philosophy because the barrier is the culture, the differences, di ba, the pluralism of what we have discussed. So that is the one, the very strength of can have shared language and understanding. And my second strength is that it promotes cultural understanding and tolerance. It promotes cultural understanding and tolerance. So philosophers may gain profound understanding of cultural context in which this tradition arose. So my weaknesses, I would like also to present my weaknesses. It can sometimes lead to oversimplification and misinterpretation of philosophical traditions. In comparing, it may remain essential to avoid oversimplistic generalization about these traditions. So, and the disadvantages or the weakness in comparing the philosopher is maybe he can conclude the oversimplification, misinterpretation. It cannot be, hindi ito natin may iwasan gani pag nagpo-compare kita, misinterpretation ang natin pagsabot of the one's culture. For example, we are born in a we are oriented with Western philosophy and we conclude the Chinese philosophy or the Eastern philosophy of this kind that this particular Chinese philosopher is this one, this particular Chinese philosopher, Eastern philosopher is this one. It is way of concluding, oversimplifying, and it can lead to misinterpretation of this particular philosophical tradition. And here it comes my two philosophical persuasion. Two philosophical persuasion. First from the Eastern, which is the Buddhism. So, social religious school during the Warring State period in China. So this is Eastern. So the main principle of this Buddhism is that inclusive care or inclusive caring, that principle of undifferentiated love. Argument made by Mu is that he stated that in order to meet the requirement of loving people, a person needs to love all people all times. That is the very summary of wisdom. They're very principled by caring, inclusive care, um, inclusive caring for other people, by loving those people. That is the very principle of the wisdom. So that is the east. Here it comes the west. I would like to present the east, the great John Paul II, or I call him Karol Wojtyła, on his concept of participation as the way of attaining common good. As the way of attaining common good, he used the concept of participation. The most famous quotation of in philosophical quotation of Saint Karol Wojtyła is that acting together with others. So it is an ability of the person to exist and acting together with others. In order to attain the common good, we must act myself together with the others. Furthermore, it is the realization of the person himself in the community. It is not just only I, but it is including the whole community. So by acting together with others, the common good and the individual good meet the person as you see them not alone, but together with the other persons. So, the common ground, I would like to present the common ground between the Eastern and the Western. So, the common ground of Wisdom and Karol Wojtyła is that first, both of them deal with a question on how to attain the common good, as well as they value community and advancement of all. It is lifting up the whole community. No, it is not just only for self-preservation and self-security, but it is uplifting all people. But what it makes them different is that Moisem built the common good in the grounds. The very different of these two is that the Moisem built how to attain the common good in the grounds of ethics, while Karol Wojtyła built in how to attain the common good in personalism. In personalism. So we know that Karol Wojtyła, since he was a pope, so his philosophy is always in pattern with the Catholic teachings. So despite of their differences, it can still be synthesized. In attaining the common good and in attaining the Karol Wojtyła's philosophy and the wisdom, it takes most of the in attaining the common good of the wisdom, the most part of it is that it is more on emotion. The wisdom law is more on emotion. In order to care, it must be grounded by emotion. It must be grounded by feelings, which is love. Well, card with you was on participation, acting together with others, take most of the part of action. So, on my own view, so in acting together with others, it can not just only a way of presence, but as well as acting by loving. So in attaining the common good, there must be acting by loving. It will be better. A new avenue to attain the common good in the reference of these both thinkers, no? That in acting together with others, it is not just only a mere presence, but acting by loving. Acting by loving. Thus, I can say that my understanding of the comparative philosophy or my own definition of comparative philosophy is that is that to bring two different philosophical traditions into comparison. But as well as comparative philosophy, it can be synthesized in two different philosophical traditions in order to arrive a new way of thinking in reference to the compared philosophical traditions developed in relative isolation. It is also what David Wong, no? Relative isolation. So comparative philosophy can foster meaningful dialogue between differing two philosophical persuasions by providing common ground for discussion and understanding. So that is my presentation of comparative philosophy, no? Ano, in fostering meaningful dialogue and different philosophical persuasion.
So, thank you, Brother Jude, for your presentation. Indeed, your presentation is very informative presentation on how comparative philosophy foster a meaningful dialogue between two philosophical persuasions. Now, let us proceed immediately to our open call forum. If you have questions on the presentation that was given to us by Brother June, you may now ask them, ask them to it out.
So I would like to ask if you can please give an example of oversimplification and misinterpretation of philosophical condition, as well as in your strength.
Um, in the witness, I said earlier that it can lead to oversimplification and misunderstanding in this philosophical tradition. So, my example of this is that the very common, no, for example, when I wrote this on my paper, but I just only failed to share it to you. It is in my paper. So my example is that it is important to avoid assuming that Western are individualistic and all the Easterns are collectivistic. So that is the very my example that in oversimplification and misinterpretation, it is not good to conclude that all the Westerns are individualistic and not all that, as well as it is not also good in comparing that all the Easterns are collectivistic. So that is my example of the weakness of the comparative philosophy, as well as in my strength as well, that I also wrote an example in my paper. I also wrote an example. For example of this is the example of this is that ano, the innate knowledge of Plato in the West and the innate knowledge of Wang Yangming. No? In a this sense, comparative philosopher can identify the areas of overlap, the resemblances between these philosophical traditions. So it is bridging the gap, no? Since both of them deal with the innate knowledge. So that is the one. And as well as my number two, it promotes cultural understanding and tolerance. My example of this brother John Paul is that Christian ethics and Islam ethics. It is more in religious, I don't know, but it can still be an example, no, that it promotes cultural understanding and tolerance. This can help to promote more nuanced understanding in their differences. I hope I answered your question, no?
Thank you very much.
Brothers, do you have any other questions?
Can you please clarify the connection between Wisdom and Carol with Emo?
Okay. So, the connection of these two different philosophical relations from the East and the West, Brother Rodney, is that, as what I said earlier, that both of these two different philosophical traditions from the Buddhism and Compqrative, both of them, what do you call this one? Both of them deal with on how to attain the common good, and they always see the common good. It is always be the community comes first, no? Community comes first. Community comes first. In order to attain the common good, it must be community comes first. No to self-preservation, not to own to security, but it is for all. So it is the common ground, no? This is the connection between these two different philosophical traditions. How to attain the common good, to what do you call this one? In attaining the common good, the value of community. So that is how I connect these two different philosophical traditions. Do you have a question?
Um, Brother Matthew, I want to clarify these questions. Um, based on your, based on the two persuasion that you have given in the earlier, how can you foster meaningful in dialogue?
So I can by I can foster meaningful dialogue as what I've said earlier in bridging them with the common ground, no? With always with the common ground. Because on this part, it is yes, they are different. They are different, no? But it doesn't mean that their differences will just only remain be always differences. But later on, this will be agreed. I believe that this will be agreed by two different traditions. And that's what I example is that acting from the language of Compqrative and loving from the language of wisdom. So I conclude it as acting by loving. So I believe that in attaining the common good, I believe that both of these two different philosophical traditions will go together in order to attain the common good, acting together with others. So in fostering meaningful comparative philosophy, the beauty of it is that it is not just it is the way of enjoying the differences of these two different philosophical traditions. The differences of the other philosophical tradition. If we will synthesize these two, it will come up to another beautiful persuasion, which is I believe that acting by loving as what in my paper different. So this is I can say that it will be meaningful, no, by enjoying their differences and to cope up or to come up with a new or an avenue which I believe that it will be useful. No, it is a fruit of our comparison of the comparative philosopher. So that is my. I hope I answered your question. No?
Do you have any other questions or comments or reaction to the duty?
Do you have any suggestion? Okay.
If there's no more questions, let us move on to the next presenter, Brother Gentle. You may now proceed with your presentation.
So, in my paper, I have here the definition of the comparative philosophy. So, there are numerous descriptions of comparative philosophy. Certain authors provide their views or definitions of comparative philosophy. So as a result, comparative philosophy is an academic field that opens the door to numerous philosophical questions from various sources. In other words, here that comparative philosophy is a fascinating academic field that has attracted the attention of many scholars. It offers a unique opportunity to explore philosophical questions from diverse perspectives and sources. So, while there are numerous descriptions of comparative philosophy, some authors have provided their own views or definitions on this field. For instance, some scholars view comparative philosophy as is a is a way of comparing different philosophical traditions and identifying similarities and differences between them. Others see it as a means of exploring the cultural, historical, and linguistic contexts in which philosophical ideas arise. Regardless of the approach taken, comparative philosophy has proven to be a helpful tool for understanding the complexities of human thought and experience. By examining different philosophical traditions side by side, so we can gain a deeper appreciation for the diversity of human culture and the many ways in which people have sought to make sense of their lives and the world around them. Ultimately, comparative philosophy reminds us that there is no one size fits all approach to understanding the human condition, and that we must remain open to new ideas and perspectives. Now, here I will present advantage, the advantage and the disadvantage of, or the strength and the weakness of comparative philosophy. So, I mentioned earlier the openness. So the openness of comparative philosophy enables the flow of ideas across other cultures and traditions, which is one of its greatest advantages. Finding recurring themes and ideas in various contexts can help to converge our understanding of the world. So this openness, though, can also be a weakness because it occasionally causes ambiguity regarding the precise nature of the study subject. So comparative philosophy might become overly wide and unfocused in their if there are no defined rules or limits. Another flaw is that various philosophical traditions frequently have quite similar world view and presuppositions. It can be challenging to meaningfully compare them. Comparative philosophy is nevertheless a crucial discipline for examining the variety of human thinking and experience. Despite these obstacles, we can discover fresh insights about our own views and values as well as those of others all around the world by contrasting various philosophical systems. On the other hand, Ronnie Littlejohn in the entry on IEP referred to comparative philosophy as a cross-cultural philosophy. So here, cross-cultural philosophy is a subfield of philosophy in which philosophers work on problems by intentionally setting into dialogue sources from across cultural, linguistic, and philosophical streams, demonstrating that it serves as a tool or even a subfield of philosophy. in its own right. No? Comparative philosophy also, which by its very nature is cultural, greatly aids in understanding various cultures. But if it is limited to only cultural concerns, it may endanger the true idea of philosophy. Now, we could only say that the dialogue between two philosophical persuasions is meaningful if it is conducted with mutual respect and a willingness to learn from one another. The exchange of ideas and perspectives is crucial in expanding our understanding of the world and our place in it. However, this requires a certain level of modesty and openness to new ideas, as well as a recognition that no single philosophy has all the answers. But on the other hand, there are various people that deny some philosophical ideas because of the fact that of their own belief or philosophy in life, which makes them grounded to ignorance. They close their minds to some ideas that somehow will benefit them. It is important to approach these dialogues with an open mind, free from preconceptions or biases, and to be willing to engage in respectful debate without resorting to personal attacks or insults. Lastly, a meaningful dialogue between philosophical persuasions can lead to greater empathy, understanding, and cooperation among individuals and communities, fostering a more peaceful and harmonious society. So that's all.
Thank you, Brother John, for your presentation. And this indeed is a wonderful presentation. It's also very informative. And now, brothers, let us proceed immediately to the open forum. If you have a question to Brother John Paul, you may now ask him.
So, Brother John, Paul, can you please clarify on how you how can comparative philosophy can foster meaningful dialogue? Because I did not really get the concept of how to can you please clarify it for me?
This might be hard to square on how comparative philosophy will continue its part. So it is a step for comparative philosophy to enter a dialogue if one philosophy is padlocked to having dialogue with another. On the other hand, this is not the end of the comparative philosophy in playing its role in comparing philosophies. Rather, rather to create a meaningful dialogue, comparative philosophy has a long way to go before it can truly fulfill its role in comparing different philosophies. While it has made significant steps in recent years, there is still much work to be done in order to create a meaningful dialogue between different schools of thoughts. One of the key challenges facing comparative philosophy is the need to avoid redundancy and repetition. In order to truly compare different philosophies, scholars must be willing to engage with the nuances and complexities of each tradition rather than simply rehashing, rehashing familiar arguments or ideas. Additionally, comparative philosophers must be willing to embrace a wide range of perspectives and approaches, including those that may challenge their own assumptions or beliefs. Finally, if comparative philosophy can overcome these challenges and continue pushing the boundaries of philosophical inquiry, it has the potential to make a significant contribution to our understanding of human thought and experience. So, it's all.
So, any other question, brothers?
So Brother John Paul, you mentioned the other one, culture. Now, can you give us an example or explanation on what will happen if comparative philosophy is too much open to the other culture?
So, as I said earlier, openness in comparative philosophy is to be open to the new ideas and perspective is a very big advantage in comparative philosophy, especially in gaining new ideas, new ideas. But this openness of comparative philosophy, as I said earlier, can also be a weakness because it occasionally causes ambiguity regarding the precise nature of the study of the subject. So that's all. I hope I suffice your question.
Brother, do you have question? Thank you, brothers, for your questions, your presentation, Brother John Paul. Let us proceed immediately to the next presenter, Brother Rodney. Proceed. Presentation.
Thank you, Brother Frederick. While Brother Matthew and Brother John Paul focuses on the definition of comparative philosophy, my paper is more on the method. So, Ronnie Littlejohn says comparative philosophy, also known as cross-cultural philosophy, is subfield of philosophy in which philosophers attempt to bring two philosophical ideas from different tradition, linguistic streams, and philosophical streams into dialogue. In comparative philosophy, dialogue is defined as the nature, goal, and method. Although it is called cross-cultural philosophy, we are less committed to cultural dialogue and place more emphasis on the between the linguistic and philosophical streams. The problem with this idea is that it confines comparative philosophy to traditional philosophy, and Chakrabarty and Weber suggest their notion of comparative philosophy without border as a concept in which we can foster a meaningful dialogue. To begin comparative philosophy without border, we must first define what the term without and border means. So, it is widely accepted that without simply means lacking. Well, in this context, it simply means the loss or the erasure. Meanwhile, a border is a line that divides two regions of space. It is often conventional but rarely natural. Border connect what is separated and separate what is connected. There are two types of borders. Borders that can be crossed and border that cannot be crossed. Border can be crossed means that when the crossing of the border becomes continuous and unstoppable, the border themselves redraws, and seeing it as a border that separates two regions of space. On the other hand, a border that cannot be crossed is a border that, that cannot connect what is separated. Then they would have limits. These limits enable us to go to the other side. Hence, these boundaries are not limit, but border. We put such that always transcends and can be crossed, that such are borders. Simmel argues that there is no such thing as border that appear as limit. Simmel uses the metaphor of doors to describe the border wherein one can pass through it and the ability to open it at any time, and everyone has the freedom to cross to the other region of space. So the aim of comparative philosophy, as what Brother Matthew said earlier, is about the erecting, detecting, smudging, and tearing down of the borders. This consists of different philosophical tradition coming from different parts of the world, different time periods, different disciplinary, even that of the same single period and lineage, as long as it opposites or at least distinguishable persuasion. Comparative philosophy is about comparing and connecting whatever unlikely pairs within the same comparanda. Comparanda means that which set out to compare. When we are comparing two philosophical ideas, we must follow method so that we can foster a meaningful comparative philosophy. Adding the tertium or the third element in the two sense is a must. Tertium is the neutral stand. By adding this tertium, we are encouraged not to immediately point out which is more convincing and acceptable, but to be in a neutral point in assessing the two comparandes. Well, I'll now present the strength and weakness in Chakrabarty's combined comparative philosophy without borders. First, it is beneficial that comparing has no boundaries because we can compare any philosophical ideas as long as it has a comparanda, which one can identify the good and the bad with each comparandi, and one can also merge the two comparandi to create his own philosophy. However, it has its flaws because everything can be compared as long as the comparanda is followed. Even if the comparanda lives in a different culture, time period, comparative philosophy is still applicable. Because of this, readers of the two comparandi may have their bias because it is possible that one comparandi is more accurate because he is more similar in culture and is not in a much distant timeline with the one comparandi. Although tertium is present, bias is, in this sense is unavoidable because the reader may see the one comparandi as unapplicable because it is culturally different from him and the philosopher's timelines have different contexts. Comparative philosophy can be applied as long as they have similar comparanda. This is why I agreed with the notion of Aaron Stanker that it is difficult to compare something with different agenda. Now I'll present my two persuasions. The idea of the morality according to Immanuel Kant, which is the deontology, and Jeremy Bentham about the consequentialism. Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, which is also the paradigm of consequentialism ethics. Classical utilitarian holds the view of hedonistic, which is a contextual consequentialism. Consequentialism ethics claims that action will only be considered as morally right depending on the consequence of the action. It is considered action that will be beneficial in the future, regardless of its present action. In its utilitarian aspect, the action is good if it maximizes the good and lesser the bad. So the best example for this is the famous trolley problem, wherein imagine yourself as the operator of a train that is running towards five people that is tied into a rail. You have an option to change route, but in the other route, there is an old woman who is also tied in a rail. Utilitarian consequentialism will suggest that it is morally good if you would choose to save the five people since they are great in number of people than the lady. The ontology ethics popularized by Immanuel Kant, his notion was ethical action follows the dictate of universal moral laws. The ontological ethics notion is to obey or our duty to follow the moral laws regarding of its consequences. It holds the ideas that some effect cannot justify the choice of our action. For such, the intelligence what to make choice right is its conformity with the moral norm. So comparative philosophy without borders suggests that everything can be compared as long as it follows the comparanda. In a pluralistic view, this is great, since by comparing two philosophical fields, even with different contexts, it suggests different modes of ideas. The problem is that while I agree that we are intertwined, we need to be specific in our topic of comparison in order to produce a better result in comparative philosophy. So, yeah, what I propose is the sameness in context similarity. Context similarity is critical in order to create a meaningful dialogue between two philosophical ideas. By doing so, we can clearly identify which of the two comparisons strengths and weaknesses. Better yet, the reader can compare and combine the two comparisons to form a new philosophy. That's all.
Thank you, Brother Rodney, for the presentation. Now let us proceed immediately the uh, to our open forum. If you have question to Brother Rodney concerning this paper that's presented to us, you may now ask.
So I will go first. So, Brother Rodney, you are saying that the comparative philosophy should not be cross-cultural philosophy?
Well, cross-cultural philosophy is still possible, but the need of same context is crucial in order to have a meaningful dialogue. You cannot compare two philosophical ideas with different background and expect to identify which is better. It is difficult to compare the Kantian deontology and Confucianism's filial piety and expect to produce a better outcome since they are different in context. The reader's reaction will surely be divided.
So, do you still have any questions?
Brother Rodney, mentioned earlier, the the same context. Can you please enlighten me with these words? What do you mean by the same in context?
What I mean by the same in context is the two comparandi must have similarity in background. The timeline of the two philosophical ideas must not be far from each other. In order to foster a meaningful dialogue, they must be talking about the same thing and the same problem.
Thank you so much, Brother Rodney. We have a question, Brother Rodney, is Brother Rodney, are you seeing that comparative philosophy has a limit?
Yes, comparative philosophy indeed has limits. They are bounded to context. Context will aid us to distinguish which of the two comparandi is better. For example, Hobbes and Locke's Hobbes and Locke, both of them are political philosophers. They have same context such as the state of nature and the social contract, but they differ in their idea of the role of the head of the state. Same context will aid us to find the strength and weakness of the two comparandi.
Thank you, Brother. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, brothers, let's proceed immediately to our last presenter. We will now present their paper. Brother Norman.
Thank you, Brother Frederick. Um, Before I start this paper, I will present to you. I will discuss the definition of David Hume about comparative philosophy. According to David Hume, comparative philosophy brings together in the philosophical tradition that have developed in relative isolation from one another, and that are defined quite broadly along the cultural original lines in the Chinese and Western. In comparative philosophy, sometimes called cross-cultural philosophy, is a subfield of philosophy in which philosophers work on the problems by intentionally citing in the dialogue sources from across cultural, linguistic, and philosophical streams. So, so even Chakrabarti comparative philosophy aims to engage the dialogue between various philosophical traditions or systems. When we compare every likely or unlikely peers that comparanda, complete sets that comparanda or both, it frequently separates that connects at the same time. A comparison always involves that two or more comparanda that is position the next to one another in a light that failure that it assumed to be shared by both comparanda. In the third term comparationes previously mentioned, the pure of the comparative investigation is the third term comparationes. Additionally, in the pre-comparative tertium is not especially or primarily used for comparison. It also includes a naked or acute comparison between Western and Eastern. In general, comparative philosophy is important and beneficial way to comprehend and appreciate in the diversity of human thinking and experience, as well as to produce a new philosophical insights and perspective. even though it has a limitation and difficulties. If narrative philosophy focuses too narrowly or finding in the parallels or differences without delving or truly into the underlying philosophical concepts and ideas. It runs the risk of being superficial or reductionist. Um, Lastly, comparative philosophy can be a potent tool or encouraging fruitful discussion between various philosophical viewpoints. Comparative philosophy can aid in the development of more open-minded or to approach a philosophical inquiry by, by promoting a wider perspective and locating a common ground by fostering a cross cultural communication and challenging presumptions. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Norman, for your brief and yet informative presentation. Now, let us proceed immediately to our open forum concerning on the presentation of Brother Norman. If you have questions, you may now ask
Should I go first?
them.
Brother Norben, what are the challenges of this dialogue in the comparative philosophy?
Brother, thank you for your wonderful questions. One of the main challenges in this dialogue in the language of barrier, as Eastern and Western philosophical tradition have developed in a different linguistic and cultural contexts with different terminologies of conceptual frameworks. Thus, it can be difficult to translate concepts between these two traditions without losing or important nuances or in misinterpreting or meaning. It is a fruitful discussion between Eastern and Western philosophy can be deepened or comprehensions of both concepts and foster intercultural communications and education. It can be also result in a fresh perspective and methods for solving philosophical that combine the base aspect of the opposing schools of thought or while honoring that their um, divergences that individual contribution to human the intellect or culture. That's all.
So, do you have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question to Brother Arben. So here's my question to Brother Nun. What are the similarities and different dialogues between the two traditions, the Eastern and the Western philosophy?
Thank you, Brother Johnson. In this case of dialogue between Eastern and Western philosophy, that the goal is to explore the similarities and differences between the two traditions, and to identify the areas or overlap, and to develop a more nuanced or understanding of the key concepts and ideas. And each tradition um, This dialogue can take various forms that including the comparative studies, interdisciplinary or collaborations in philosophical conversions that between practitioners or each traditions. That's all.
Thank you, Brother. Thank you, Brother. How about you, Brother? What do you have a question? How about you, Brother Jude?
No further questions.
How about you?
I already asked for the
Okay, let us thank ourselves for this, for your wonderful presentation. Indeed, as what you have said, comparative philosophy can foster a meaningful dialogue between two philosophical persuasion because, as you have said in your presentations of your papers, no, because it can give a common ground or a common language, a shared language that will lead us to a deeper understanding of these two philosophical persuasions. And also, the methods will help us explain clearly the difference of these two philosophical persuasions. And the other says that the openness of comparative philosophy that will lead us, no? It will lead us to a wider perspective, a deeper understanding. So, to conclude our roundtable discussion, may I ask Brother Rodney to lead us in prayer.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever.
Saint Vincent de Paul,
Pray for us.
Saint John Calabria,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
Amen. And that concludes our roundtable discussion. Thank you, brothers, and thank you for your informative insights on how comparative philosophy foster a meaningful dialogue. Jacob.
Virgin.